You're listening to Crushing Classical, How to Thrive in Your Creative Career. I'm your host, Janet Ingle, oboist, entrepreneur, author, and business and creative coach for musicians. This week on the podcast, you'll hear Kirin McElwain, cellist, performer, and coordination enthusiast. You'll hear the story of a musician who has the courage to try new things over and over, and courage to stop the things that aren't working for her. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the show. Kirin McElwain is a performer-composer on cello and voice, and more recently, laptop and modular synthesizer. Equally at home in concert halls, recording studios, and in DIY venues, Kirin has contributed sounds to numerous film and television scores, contemporary dance performances, mixed media installations, and traditional classical and contemporary classical performances. In her own sound practice, she explores the tension between form and chaos, Western classical harmony and noise, and ideas of goodness and correctness in musical style. Currently, she's an Alexander Technique practitioner who works with musicians both one-on-one and through her digital membership, Feel Better, Sound Better. She's so down-to-earth and personally delightful, but this charm conceals an absolutely intense commitment to creating a life and a career on her own terms, and it is so impressive. I know you will love hearing from Kirin. If you spend more than a few minutes a month on billing and scheduling for your teaching studio, you might consider Fonz. It's an all-in-one platform to help service-based businesses, like music teachers, in fact, it was originally created by a music teacher, to manage their clients and their billing without stress and hassle. It helps you to up-level your presence and show up to your clients and students as the professional that you are. You get a free 2-week trial with the link that you'll find in the show notes. Kirin McElwain, thank you so much for speaking with me. Welcome to Crushing Classical.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
I went to your website, Kirin, and I loved seeing the number and variety of projects that you are creating and ways that you work with people and ways that you help people and ways that you yourself move and perform and create opportunities. It was really exciting to me to see how many things you do and do so well. And rather than me trying to create this image for our listeners here, could you just tell us a little bit about what are you about, Kirin?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a performer primarily on the cello. That's what my training is in. But also more recently on voice and electronics. I work with modular synthesizers and my laptop sometimes. And in addition to being a cellist performer person, I also have a teaching practice where I teach coordination and mindfulness primarily to other musicians based on the principles of the Alexander Technique. So I am a certified Alexander Technique teacher, but I think the way that I structure my teaching practice is maybe a little bit different than how Alexander is normally taught. And yeah, that's sort of my career right now in a nutshell. I ran an education program for a while, and yeah.
I love it. So immediately, I'm interested in your journey into Alexander Technique and your journey, maybe back out of it a little bit. How are you thinking about Alexander Technique as you work with people and in your own practice?
Yeah, well, I got into Alexander Technique extremely reluctantly. It was something that I had heard of, and I think it actually took me 3 or 4 encounters with the work over a number of years. I thought it was kind of a complete and total crock of shit, if I'm being completely honest. I I think I had when I was studying. So I didn't do my undergrad in music. I have a degree in economics. Don't ask me why,
Oh,
but
but I really want to ask you why, but no, I won't at the moment. Please go ahead with your story.
it's a very long and convoluted story. Yeah,
Sure.
but during my undergrad, I was, studying cello with somebody, and they were like, "You really need Alexander technique." And I got a book on it from somebody, and I was like, "This looks weird and boring, and I have no interest in this." And then a few years later, I actually took a series of lessons with somebody, um, just because I always worked really hard at my playing, but I didn't feel like I didn't feel like the results were like really like indicative of like how much effort and time and energy I was spending trying to work on my playing, which is kind of why I got into it. But yeah, I took a series of lessons, and again I was like, this seems really strange. Like, what's really going on here? Like, it felt very esoteric, and if I'm being completely honest, I remember, I was like 22 at the time and like really poor, and I was like, this is a lot of money to be spending for something that I don't really know like what the fuck is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I guess a few years after that I was finishing up my master's degree in cello, and you know I had made, I had made progress in my playing, but I just wasn't feeling really happy or satisfied with where I was musically. And I was also feeling a tiny bit panicky because at the time I was under the impression that, like, at the end of your degree, like, you better like know what you're doing, and like learning stops after school, which again is like not true.
Right,
Uh,
but everyone feels that way, right? You're
yeah,
leaving school
yeah,
with a
but
master's
that's kind
degree,
of
so
like the
now you're
headspace I was in.
exactly. So now you're a grown up, clearly, and you should be
Yeah,
equipped to like go out in the world and do things. And
yeah,
no, actually, you're 22 years old, and it feels terrible.
yes. But it's actually kind of a weird story. I was living in this large, like, old commercial space with like 8 roommates at the time, and somebody, a violinist, like, was came and interviewed to like rent a room in the house, and they had just finished their Alexander technique training. And this person, my friend Joe, we became friends. We started playing together, and I asked him for a lesson out of the blue one day. And again, kind of had the same experience. Like, I don't really know what's going on. But it was like in the week after that lesson, I started to notice like all this crazy shit, like in my playing. Like, I was noticing, like, wow, I'm like tensing up my legs every time I play the cello. And that was something that no one had ever pointed out to me. I had, you know, lots of cello teachers at this time, and no one had ever talked about that to me. And then I also noticed that I held my breath constantly when I played. And I also noticed that I think when I was walking up the stairs, I noticed that like I was like sort of like tensing up like my neck and my shoulders. And it was like, and it was so strange because I was like, oh, I think like this is what, like, he was talking about in that lesson like a few days ago. But it was, for whatever reason, that experience was like sort of got me into it, and I started taking regular lessons, and pretty quickly I entered a teacher training program because I was like, this seems to be like the missing piece that I've been looking for, that I didn't know I was looking for. And even though I don't really want to teach this work, I need to find out as much as about it as possible. So yeah.
Yeah, that feels so resonant. This idea that like the information was being given to you and it was being offered to you, but you had to be ready and like able to actually feel the application in your own body before suddenly it was before suddenly it was an aha.
Yeah, totally, totally. And I think that, kind of just depending on, where you are in your life. And then also, just like with studying an instrument, I'm sure like you've had any number of teachers on the instrument, and some of them, you probably had like these really powerful, you know, uh, kind of career shifting or life shifting experiences with. And then others you're like not for me, but maybe you have friends who studied with that person and had, an amazing experience with them. I think that like, when it comes to learning, it's like, what level of readiness are we at as individuals? And then, is that complementary with what someone else is offering as a teacher and the space and the experience that they're offering?
Yes, that's exactly it. You can be the greatest teacher in the world, but if the student isn't ready to receive the information in the way that you are able to deliver it, that's not a good alignment, and it doesn't mean anything about like your previous Alexander teachers. It was just that
totally.
was not the right moment for you to feel that resonance.
Yeah, totally. And I will also say too that even though for me the Alexander technique is very much sort of a foundation of how I approach music, how I approach teaching, and it's an important part of my life. I don't expect that it's going to be this like earth-shattering thing for every single person out there. I think that as musicians, like there's certainly acquiring technical skill and getting our reps in is really important, but I think that if we're in this for the long haul, we need to find other tools and practices that support our physical and mental and creative well-being. And for me, and I think for a lot of people, the Alexander technique is part of that. But I think sometimes from the Alexander world, there can be like this vibe, like, oh, you have to, this is the most life-changing thing ever. And I'm like, you know what? This might not be your cup of tea. And I want people, ultimately, I just want people to find the tools and practices that work for them. So
yes, 100%. That makes so much sense because it's not about having one framework that works for everybody. It's about like finding the ways that you work. So how are you, I know that you're working with the Alexander technique now and working with people on that. So how are you using that, and how is that different from the sort of, I don't know, correct framework, the sort of official?
I wouldn't say the correct framework, but I think maybe, I think that we first want to look at like, why are musicians coming to this work? First of all, it's like, music is a hard career. I think that we have erratic schedules. Well, nowadays people are finally starting to tour again. People are on the road a lot. I think that it's a physically demanding job. And it's also a job that, because your income tends to fluctuate, when work is available, we tend to have to like rally whether or not we want to or not, so that we're taking care of ourselves for leaner time. So I think that that's kind of where musicians are. And I think that historically, Alexander technique has been a bit cost prohibitive because it's mainly private lessons, or maybe you get a class at school. But I think that in general, what I've observed is that people are very concerned with like talking about the history of the Alexander technique. And like, I've just in the people that come to me who generally have an interest in, personal growth and creative growth and mindfulness. But and they think the Alexander technique seems cool, but then like when they've taken a lesson, they're like, is this about how to sit in a chair, or like where to put your neck or something? And I think that there can be a lot of focus on like trying to explain what the Alexander technique is, instead of like trying to give musicians some like very basic tools that they can apply on a regular basis that help make the burnout and the erratic schedules and the struggle to care for oneself and take care of oneself physically and mentally and creatively, that can help make that a little easier. So I do have a private practice here in Brooklyn where I work with a lot of musicians, both people in the classical realm. And then what's also been really fun is that I've started to work with people who are like rock musicians, who are improvisers, electronic musicians. And that's something that I just really love because it's, getting to talk to people. It's like I learn about their creative practices and, it just, it sort of feels like collaborative, I guess, in that regard. And then I'm also starting a digital membership that I'm super excited about. That's basically just going to be an accessible way for people to uh, learn some etudes and so just some tools that they can apply on the regular without needing to make this huge like financial commitment, without needing to make this huge time commitment, to taking private lessons, because you don't have to be like all in order to benefit from this work. And I think that that seems to kind of be a message that I think a lot of people get. And it's like, no, you can like do this like 5 or 10 minutes a day and like your playing will reap benefit from it.
Like the fact, like for example, people tell me that yoga is essential, that having like a yoga practice as a musician is so crucial. And I get bored within 5 minutes of
You and me,
starting,
you and me both.
right, of starting a yoga thing. But sure
Yeah.
enough, I do feel better if I stop playing the oboe for a minute and stretch for 5 minutes and like find myself in my body and enjoy breathing for a few minutes and then
Yeah.
hop back. And I don't need the history of yoga, and I don't need like 17 sun salutations in a row, and I don't need to be able to. I can't even name positions right now. Like, I don't need a 45-minute flow practice.
Yeah.
I just need to like actually stretch for a
I
minute.
yeah, I love that analogy. I mean, I personally I love running. I'm a very athletic person. Yoga just is not my cup of tea. But I do love like the yoga with Adriene videos where it's like, oh, here's a 7-minute video that I can do. If I want to do some yoga, I
Mm-hmm.
can do it. Whereas I have friends, have done teacher training and all of that. And that's great for them. And I think that this, this membership, the Feel Better, Sound Better membership is really there for like when you're practicing, or if you are playing a 3-hour gig and you have a tiny little break for 20 minutes, you go in the green room, you can lie down, you can put on a recording, and you can kind of come back into your body, release maybe some of like the tension that's built up from adrenaline and certainly just fatigue,
Mm-hmm.
and feel a little bit better and play better as a result. So
That's brilliant. And I really like the way that you are creating offerings that are like available for people at different levels of commitment, both financial commitment and like time and energy commitment. Not everyone needs to dive into like a 10-week, a 4-year Alexander teacher training,
totally.
whatever that looks like. Maybe you just need some help right now. And it's really impressive to see you creating different ways to engage with this kind of material and different ways to engage with the help that you have to offer. And I don't know that a lot of performers, a lot of people who come into the field as fundamentally performers think about this so much. I don't hear a lot of musicians saying things like, well, there are like 3 different ways to work with me, depending on how much you want to commit your time, how much you want to really dig in. And I wonder where that creativity and that sort of resourcefulness are coming from. Is that your economics degree?
No, not at all. I mean, it's funny. I mean, I think that I have been self-resourcing, and when I say self-resourcing, I've been creating my own things,
Yeah.
both in my teaching practice as well as performance opportunities and such, pretty much my whole career. I think that maybe the difference, I think that the difference does have to do with the fact that, I did not go to conservatory for 6 to 8 years. I barely have a performance degree compared to most of the people that I work with. I have a 2-year master's degree, and that's kind of it. I did have a liberal arts education. And what I would say is that I don't think the difference is that I studied economics, but I think that like conservatory culture, especially classical conservatory culture, really trains you to constantly look outside of yourself for approval and opportunities, because certainly in Western classical music, and this is something that I wish had been talked about when I was younger, we're taught to emulate certain sounds and certain styles, but we're not taught that we're learning to adhere to an aesthetic. We're just taught like, oh, this is good, that's not good, this is in tune, that is out of tune, this is beautiful tone, this is not beautiful tone. And so I think that like, and maybe I'm taking this like too like zoomed out, but I really think that like, in terms of like what we're learning about creating sound and thinking about sound, it's very much we are looking to somebody else for approval, or we are looking outside of ourselves for that. And then I think that when it comes to our ideas of success, at least within the classical realm, historically, it's been, oh, you are allied with an institution, you teach at such and such school, you have been invited to something that already exists. And we tend to look at that and put that up on a pedestal as this is success, you've made it, this is good. And while that's nothing against, anyone who has a job with an institution or chooses to continue to play only classical rep, that's just one option. And so I think that for me, maybe not being in that environment for like 8 years, while on the one hand, like if you talked, I was like completely miserable at like, the remedial oral skills classes I had to take in grad school. I mean, it was just like, the teacher was like, how did you get into school? Because I was, we started like 4-part dictation on day 1. And I was like, I've never done any of this before. But like, so like, while like, it did kind of suck to not have that 4-year conservatory undergrad in grad school, I do think that when it's come to approaching my career and trying to decide like, what do I want to do? What am I interested in? Not having been locked into like that environment has actually been a really healthy thing for me. So I think that's one part of it. And then I think the other part of it is that when I left school, I had a few jobs working for like an event company, just doing like, like as like a part of a wedding quartet. And then I had a couple of jobs teaching at like community music schools. And I was like, I hate the people that I'm teaching and I'm getting shafted. Like I knew how much the school was charging the student. And I was like, this is fucked up. Like you're charging like $90 an hour and you're paying me like 35. Like, and I don't even want to teach this person. This is such bullshit. And so I think like I just being like pissed off and feeling like underappreciated, or like, just like I was getting shafted. I was like, I need to find something else out. So I think it was like the combination of those two things.
Of like just being absolutely underserved by the adjuncting system, even though you're exactly right that classical musicians are trained to bow down to these institutions, to presume that teaching for a college is better than teaching privately, because you've been chosen by a gatekeeper, and so therefore you've made it. Getting into an orchestra so that you can play classical music at the whim of the conductor and the board is the goal. But meanwhile, you're out here making projects that are innovative and interesting and exciting, and creating ways for people to work with you that are outside of those institutions, and building it the way that it works best for you and best for the sounds that you're trying to create and produce.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that so far it's worked out pretty well. And it's funny, I mean, when I look back, at least on like the last 5 years and like some of the things I've done, it's like what I've done has like evolved a lot. And I think that like, I've just been in this constant ongoing process of trying to figure out what it is exactly that I want to do, and sort of like trying to find ways to both meet my needs on like a rent food,
On like a human financial
student
level.
loans
Yeah.
level, as well as feeling, like creatively satisfied. And I think that um, one thing that I have done, at least in the last couple of years, is that, well, certainly like starting my own stuff like required like taking leaps and maybe, doing things that felt a little risky.
Yeah.
I've become more comfortable sort of like figuring out when things aren't working for me, or and not being afraid to leave them behind, I even if like maybe like all of like the external like voices and like, sort of that classical music training, just like be grateful for what you have, like,
Mm-hmm.
it
Yes.
which has been like, it's definitely been scary, but it's something that I do feel like when I like listen to myself, I'm like, no, you can like trust yourself here. So yeah.
And that is so beautiful. And the thing that I am the most excited about in your story, as I am understanding
Mm-hmm.
it, just the ability to try things, to try new things, and then when they're not working for you, to get curious about what about this is not working? Why am I unhappy here? What could I do to take action to like make this make this be better? Can I ask you, Kirin, about the Brooklyn Cello Studio that you
Yeah, sure.
started and then stopped again? Yes, like
Yes.
tell me about this, because I think it's such a triumph of courage and of courage. I'm gonna say, and entrepreneurship and talent and skill. Please.
Yeah. So Brooklyn Cello Studio was an education program that I founded, and it's a program that kind of grew out of just having kind of a part-time teaching practice, as
Mm-hmm.
something I enjoyed and was a means of, stable income for me. But I kind of officially created it, I'd say in January of 2019. And it was a group oriented education program for adult students. And um, it was something that I was like, I always enjoyed working with adults. And it was something that I was like, this doesn't really exist. And there's a lot of people like who have an interest in the instruments. I feel like we're kind of living in this golden age of cello,
Yeah.
and I wanted to just try to create something that would like sort of serve the needs of like a normal person who has a job and maybe has a family, and but who still wants to learn. And because I felt like a lot of the stuff that existed for adults, it was kind of like, okay, if you're like retired and have like a ton of money, like you can go to like chamber music camp and like be treated like a 5-year-old. Like it was just like I kind of
Yeah.
just like I just like the whole vibe of like the like adult
Mm-hmm.
amateur scene. I was like this is like kind of not like fair towards the people who are like, it just felt like it was like
Yeah.
a recreation of like stuff that was available for 5-year-olds just with
Mm-hmm.
adults. And I was just like, the people that I teach are like cool and normal and like don't want that. Like, what can I make something that like maybe serves their needs and gives them a better experience? So I
Cello
started that.
experience for cool normal people. I love it. Go on.
Yes. And yeah, and so I started that in like January of 2019. And then the pandemic, and it was in this first year, it was super successful. It was just me. I was teaching probably, I don't know, like maybe 8 classes a week.
Mm-hmm.
And it was doable all on my own. But I also, like back then, I was like, okay, like this is like financially successful, but I can't actually see myself continuing to do this
Yeah.
in a few years. And so at the time I was like, okay, I'm going to bring, I have enough profit that I can bring in other people to help share some of the teaching burden. And also I was thinking too, like, you know, in my own cello experience, like you learn different things from different people.
Yeah.
And like that could actually be like this really kind of cool, like cross pollination type situation. Where people get to take classes with different teachers on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So then in February of 2020, I hired two other friends and colleagues to work with me. And then we all know what happened in March 2020.
We sure do.
But then and so then suddenly this thing that I had been doing, not in like a super full-time way, it was suddenly like, okay, this is like your job now because you have like no other money coming in
Right.
from anything else. And which was great. Like we had this like incredible year in 2020. I finished out that year. I now had 4 people working with me. And the program, we had students in Switzerland, we had students in California, we had students in Chicago, like students, someone in England, we had people all over the world.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt for a second and just like pinpoint some of the things you just talked about.
Oh yeah, sure.
Like created a thing that you didn't see existing anywhere, and you grew it to where you personally were teaching 8 classes a week and like paying all of your own bills and feeling great about it. But you weren't quite happy, so you zoomed out and said, how could I do this better? How could I like relieve the load on me and also employ other musicians and also like build something that it was even better for the students than what you had already. So you brought people on board. Like I'm just sort of pinpointing these for our podcast listeners.
Yeah.
Because like all of these steps are so savvy and so brilliant and so smart.
And so scary.
And so scary.
Yeah.
So
like,
scary.
I mean, before like, just like hiring people, because I didn't want to hire people if like I was basically replicating what I see a lot of music education programs doing across the country, which is like not paying people enough. And like, I understand, like, I very much understand for anyone who is like a studio owner or music school owner who might be listening to this, like rent, overhead, like that stuff is expensive, but that's where like, you know, we need to do a better job as an industry and we should be charging more for lessons so that we pay people, you know, something amounting to a living wage. And, you know, obviously like I was not, you know, able to offer people, you know, a salary and like, you know, health benefits or anything like that. But I was able to pay people like well above what the standard is in New York. And, you know, that was something that was really important to me. And that was also something that like scared the shit out of me too at the same time. Because, you know, I wanted to make sure that like students were being served, that I had never like managed anything before. Like, you know, it was just like, it was so new.
Yes.
But yeah, so I did that and, you know, and it worked. And I think that in terms of like, you know, anytime you're doing something and you're starting to get the feeling like, I don't know if this is like, if you're getting like that nudge, like you need to listen to that nudge and like ask yourself, okay, well, what can I do like right now that like maybe I can hire somebody, or maybe I don't need to like take this gig anymore, you know, like just constantly having that conversation with yourself, I think is really helpful.
Absolutely. And I think so many people don't. They're like, this thing again. Or, okay, another day, another dollar, like let's get back to work.
And that's like where, oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, and like, that's exactly what the creativity and that's exactly what's so exciting about talking to you. Is that as we sit here, you're like, oh yeah, and then like, this wasn't quite working for me. And this wasn't quite working for me. So I did this. And I am spending time on this because I really feel like it's important for listeners to hear that it is absolutely possible to like identify the thing that is not working for you and then take steps to change it.
Yeah.
Even when the steps are scary. Okay, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Well, I think that this actually relates to a larger conversation that I've been having with myself, especially this year, around what are your standards for yourself?
Yeah.
And what are you willing to do so that you maintain your standards for yourself? And that is something that is deeply uncomfortable. And that's something that's very challenging to do. And I think causes deep discomfort for anybody who's engaged in that process. And I think that a lot of the times, because we kind of get so indoctrinated with like, oh, you're never going to make it as a musician. So if you figure out some way that you get to pay your bills, you're kind of like, okay, I'm just going to stay here, even if I'm not like super stoked about
Yeah,
where I am right now.
that scarcity mindset of like, okay,
Oh
this
my
is
God,
working, so I better hold on to it. Can't lose this.
it is so insidious,
Hmm.
the whole scarcity mindset. And I mean, this is something that I've been working on for like the past 5 years. And like on a weekly basis, at least 2 or 3 times a week, it's like I kind of catch myself falling back into that. And it's like I'm much better at recognizing it and, sort of pausing and then redirecting when this stuff comes up. But it's like, ugh, it's like it's really insidious.
It is, and it's a life's work, right? I mean, mindset
Yeah.
work is always going to be a thing that like comes
Yeah.
back to bite you somewhere.
Yes, totally. Totally. Yeah, so I think that yeah, so I built up this education program. And then like and while I was doing this, I was like, my plan was like, I'm going to do this so that eventually like I do not need to necessarily be in this business on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And, it was doing like financially like really well.
Hmm.
Especially, for something that was not even like it's not like we had like 30 classes a week or anything like that, but we had this core group of about 100 students or so,
Amazing.
and people really enjoyed like what we did. I think people liked the vibe of what we were doing. um I agree, people that I was working with, but as I got to a point in like 2021 where I was like, I feel stuck. Like I felt, and I never felt as stuck as I felt in 2021 actually. And I just I didn't enjoy what I was doing. It was like it was becoming really hard for me to show up. And it got to the point where I realized that the only reason I was showing up was because other people were really into what I had built, and I was just not into it at all. And I had all this sort of coincided too with over the pandemic, like I had started like a composition practice for the first time. And there was like I'm still like honestly trying to like process. I know we're all trying to process the last 2.5 years, but
Of course.
it just got to this point where I was like, this is not even something that like I see having in my life. And that was painful because
Hmm.
when I was working with students, like I loved the people who were part of our program. Like it wasn't like, it wasn't like torture to be teaching or anything, but it was just like, this is taking up so much mental real estate for me. And I don't want my mental real estate to be going towards running an education program. Like this really does not, this feels at odds for what I want to be doing. And so long and the short of it is that like I made the decision in November to just end it in at the end of 2021. And I two of my colleagues, took on a bunch of students for the program. I'm still working with like a very tiny, tiny, tiny handful of people. But and that was really scary to do because I was like, I am going to disappoint people because people love us. And like I would literally like when new students were coming to the program, they would literally be like, I can't believe you exist. Like, and we had like our messaging was like super on point. And like,
Yeah.
I like we were doing something that was really different than like what else existed in
Right.
terms of like music education, like for that
Hmm.
particular person. And um yeah, and so I sort of created like all this space at the end of last year. And I've just been kind of in the free fall liminal space since then.
I mean, you're laughing at it and saying it almost self-deprecatingly, but it's a really beautiful space, and this is very resonant for me. I went through something that was not this dramatic, but similar back in
Mm-hmm.
2019, where I dropped all of my own private students because
Mm-hmm.
I just couldn't like give them that mental real estate
Mm-hmm.
anymore.
Yeah.
And from there created different things. So like I know with the creativity that you have, there's plenty more bubbling up. But what was my point here? I was going to say that it takes so much courage to stop doing something that
Yes.
isn't working for you, especially in the absence of an immediate, like, okay, well, I'll just step from this like major teaching program into this other major teaching
Right.
program. No, no, no. You're building things that are different and new and maybe not even fully baked yet, even maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just putting words in your mouth. I'm just thinking out loud about this. But it's really beautiful and creative, and it's so courageous. And that is my question. My question is, how do you dare to stop doing the thing that is bringing the money and the thing that is making the magic so that you
Yeah.
can make room for more magic?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I think like over the past like year or so, there's been these other things that have revealed themselves to me. So like I have the solo project that I've been working on that I am deeply, deeply excited about and is like feels like one of the most important things I've ever worked on. That's kind of and that's been something that like was already like in the works, but like as soon as I made the decision to like stop the studio, like suddenly like things started like moving really fast with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I've had my Alexander practice. That's been something I've been doing for the past like 7 years or so. And I've always had this like very small roster of clients. And that is work that like after I like teach like Alexander, like I just feel really good. Like I'm like completely energized. Like it's just that work is so I think affirming for me. I love musicians. Like I love
Yeah.
playing with musicians. I love talking to musicians. I love teaching other musicians. Like I just that feels like so there's just something about that work that I don't get from teaching cello.
Yeah.
And so it's like I had kind of these like two things that I was like, I would just much rather be spending my time doing
Mm-hmm.
this. But in terms of like the, the financial aspect of it, I mean, like what I did was, I still do have a small handful of cello students that I work with who I love very much and are, I kind of like took on like just enough of that I knew I could like pay my
Mm-hmm.
rent on my studio space, pay my rent and like, basic bills. But it's been, it was scary because like, and what I will say is that like I went into this year not really knowing like how I was gonna take care of things. And
Mm-hmm.
weird things have like started to surface like it that have helped me, pay those bills. In the last few months. But at the same time, like what that looks like for everybody is going to be really different,
Sure.
just depending on what your circumstances are. But I think that I just decided I could trust myself, I think. And I also my thing is like, I can go back and, work at the tea shop again if I need to. And honestly, like that doesn't I liked working at the tea shop. So no, I'm serious. And
No,
like and like
I'm.
and I think that there's a lot to be said, like when it comes to making these decisions, if there's something that is like draining your energy, you don't enjoy it, it's something you do not want to do, like do not, even if you're getting paid $100 an hour teaching private lessons, do not like there are external costs. Like let's actually use my economics degree, like there's all these like externalities that also have costs to them. So it's
Mhm.
not just the $100 an hour because like your energy, your creativity, like what happens to that? And you actually might be better off working a job or, a side gig that doesn't pay you as much, that does, but you can still meet, take care of your rent or your student loans or whatever. And, that might actually be better for creating the conditions to make the thing that you want to make.
Yes.
Yeah. But I also think too that like I'm somebody who is comfortable with a very high level of risk, and calculated risk.
Sure.
And I do an exercise a lot of the times when I'm making decisions where I write out like what is like the absolute craziest, like best version of what might happen. And this is actually, I believe, I got this exercise from someone I worked with a few years ago. I actually believe that it's originally from Tim Ferriss, who I think is like a gross like productivity optimization bro, and like his work, I find his work like really gross and problematic in a lot of ways. But this exercise is good. But where you write out like what's the absolute best possible outcome, and like you want to go like really like kind of wild with this, like what could be like the craziest best thing that could happen if you make this decision, and then what are like the absolute like worst possible case like scenarios that could come out of this. And you also want to be like as extreme as possible with that. And then you write out like what is the most likely outcome, and then you actually write down like what will you do, like what are the steps that you're going to take if the best, the worst, and the most likely outcome like comes from this. And if you can handle, if you like have a plan for how to handle that. And for me, like my brain, it's very much like worst case scenario thinking, like that's just like what I've been in therapy for years for. But like like that's where my mind always wants to go. And I find it so helpful to just be like, oh, if this happens, then this is what I will do. If that happens, then this is what I will do. And that exercise is one that I've come back to like a lot, so that, and I think that's the thing that's like helped me give myself permission to like do stuff that I think most people would never would not want to do. So yeah.
Ooh, I love that. Love that. I've heard that exercise and used it before with people in terms of the worst case half of it. Because that can help assuage people's fears. Like if this goes the worst possible way, what does that actually look like, and what would you do to deal with that? But I've never heard the corollary of imagining the like wildest best case scenario. And that's also
that
so
oftentimes
inspiring.
that's scary
magic
to people too. Like I think that like fear of success is like that's something that people are afraid of as well. And I think that like for me, I mean, like in terms of the work that I'm getting ready to put out into the world right now, I mean, I have an enormous fear of like being seen and being seen as myself. And pretty much everything that I'm working on is like Kirin showing up like fully as herself, and like not hiding behind the name of a program that she's created. I'm not a collaborator in someone else's creative project. I am literally just myself. And it has taken a lot of work for me to even get to this point. And like, even now it's like on a daily basis, I'm like, oh my God. But like, that's, there's no other way. I've created the conditions so that like, we're moving in this direction kind of like, regardless of what happens. So,
it is so exciting talking to you, because you keep using words like, I have created the conditions for this, and then I built this, and then like it's really I hope that people are hearing just this feeling of possibility, and this feeling of like self creation that you're offering as a model.
Yeah, I think the phrase that really resonates for me is this idea of self-resourcing. And that's something that I define as like kind of no matter what the external circumstances might be dictating for yourself, like just identifying like what are your needs, and then how are you, what are ways that you can get those needs met. And those needs can be like your creative needs. Those needs can be, you know, how do you feel when you're done at the end of the workday? Those needs can be how much like do you need to make every month so that you pay your student loans and your rents and you're saving money for taxes, like, you know, just starting from there. And that's something that, and I'm saying this not because I'm like, oh, I'm an expert in this, because like I feel like a hot mess most of the time, and I'm still trying to like figure everything out.
Join the club there.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, it's like, I'm like, the only thing I know is that I know nothing. Yeah, but like how that phrase like really resonates for me. And that's like how I forget what you said, but yeah, like self-resourcing, like how can you give yourself what you need, instead of looking to other people to give it to you, to give it to you or give you the permission. How can you give yourself the permission, and how can you get your needs met?
That is gorgeous, and a spectacular close to this interview. Kirin, how can people get in touch with you or follow you if they are interested?
Sure, yeah. So my website is Kirin McElwain. That's KirinMcElwain.com. And I have, if you're interested in either one-on-one Alexander work or joining the Feel Better, Sound Better membership, there's a link there. And I'm also on Instagram, but like, so I have like, social media gives me such bad anxiety, so I'm not really on there, but it's at Kirin McElwain. So that's probably the best way to find me.
Wonderful. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure you subscribe on your app of choice and leave a review too. It really helps us. Don't forget to check out Fawns if your own teaching or service-based business needs better systems. You can use the link in the show notes for a free 2-week trial. Our theme music was composed by Dream Vance. You can hear his first album, Re-Entry, on Spotify and Apple Music, and follow him there for more innovative synthwave music. You can find me at janetingle.com, which is also where you can pick up a copy of The Happiest Musician book, reach out to me with thoughts or questions about the podcast, or apply for a free clarity call to explore your own portfolio career and thriving musical life. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.